Things are getting insane because tomorrow an announcement is about to be made that happens only twice a year in Canada, and it impacts every single Canadian and what their dollars are spent on and what gets absolutely ignored. And the thing that makes this so insane isn't that the announcement is happening, no, it's that it's happening in the midst of several controversies, one of which includes a $15 billion corporate subsidy meant to create Canadian jobs that's now being staffed by foreign workers. On top of that, the federal government is facing a situation that it has never faced before, and it's resulting in about 11 cents of every dollar you and I send to Ottawa via taxes being evaporated into thin air, as they're forced to break some promises at the same time to many Canadians. So let's talk about all of this because, believe it or not, it is all interconnected. And we're going to start with the announcement first, and then we'll dive more into those controversies that I've been talking about. You see, tomorrow at 4 p.m., the Finance Minister of Canada will get up on the stand and give one of only two updates that happen throughout the year about the country's finances. This one's called the Fall Economic Statement, or the FES, and it is generally like a smaller statement that explains, okay, here's what we want to do with Canadian taxpayer money. It's a little bit less detailed than the budget, which is the other item that comes up every April or so.
It will be focused on building more homes faster and making more homes available for Canadians to live in, on continuing our work to make life more affordable for Canadians, and on continuing to deliver our fiscally responsible economic plan.
So she highlights what some of the big focuses are going to be. The first thing she brings up is housing, and then she talks about affordability and delivering on their fiscally sustainable platform. Now, there could be a lot more than this inside of the economic statement that's coming out tomorrow, but we actually got some of those details ahead of time via a leak. Let me show you this. Let's start with the housing side of things. They say that new measures will include $15 billion in 10-year loans for rental housing construction, a $1 billion fund to get more affordable housing, as well as, this one's interesting, new mortgage rules for lenders dealing with homeowners at risk. We'll talk about that in a second. And this is all according to the source that's leaked this, who's not authorized to speak about the statement before it comes out tomorrow. Now, this $15 billion in funding is pretty familiar from this government, sort of just throwing as much money as they can at the housing problem. It's similar to what they've done in the past. We haven't really seen that great results from them. And this is something that the leader of the Conservatives pointed out just today.
After 8 years of Trudeau promising affordable housing and spending billions of dollars on the bureaucracy to support that, we have a doubling of housing costs. Remember, tomorrow he will come out here and he will make billions of dollars of housing promises, just like he did 8 years ago. And what will that do? It will build bureaucracy, and it will supply Liberal ministers with a steady stream of phony photo ops.
So some lower interest rate loans probably for people who are building rental housing. This is the first promise. But the one I find most interesting here, and that relates to a lot of what I've talked about on the channel before, is right here, the new mortgage rules about codifying the government's expectations around mortgage relief for homeowners at risk and how they are to be treated by their financial institution. Okay, let's break that down. It's no secret that a lot of people in Canada are stressed out because they got mortgages at like 2% and now they're having to renew them at 5.5% or even 6%. These higher rates, and even the previous video I just put out on the channel talked about the 1.1 million mortgages coming due over the next 2 years and how that could be a very big problem. Now, the Liberal government seems like they're sort of seeing this and saying, we're going to provide a little bit of a backstop here for Canadians who might have gotten in over their heads on mortgages. You'll have to come back here tomorrow evening because we don't know what codifying the government's expectations are. Like, what are the government's expectations? My guess is that it's sort of making new rules about allowing people to extend amortizations, extending the amount of time they have to pay their loan, so to make the payments smaller. I've talked a lot on the channel about how I'm not entirely sure this is a good long-term solution because homeowners who are supposed to be feeling the pain of higher interest rates to quell inflation, it could quell demand, which can bring down inflation. Well, they're not really feeling that pain because of these sort of extensions of loans, this softening of the blow. But it seems like that might be something the government's considering here. On top of that, people who have insured mortgages, those are people who have put down less than 20% and as a result needed to get mortgage insurance when they bought their property. Well, those people, as their mortgages come due, if they want to switch lenders, well, now they're not going to have to pass the financial stress test, something that makes them qualify at a 2%, roughly, maybe 2.5% now, percent higher interest rate than the current market rate to make sure there's room in case interest rates were to go up further. Now they're not going to have to pass that stress test anymore, which means we're really out of dry powder here when it comes to ammunition to sort of help people in these situations and to prevent a potential big cascading mortgage crisis. It's the theme of sort of kicking the can down the road a little bit, which we'll talk about when it comes to all of those other controversies that we're going to get into in just a minute. And the final sort of housing-related promise that they're making here is to make changes to short-term rentals. Those are Airbnbs, saying that in areas where Airbnbs are already prohibited, people can no longer make tax deductions on the cost of operating that short-term rental, that Airbnb. Now, I don't think this is a bad idea. It's going to cut down on the number of unregulated or sort of people going against regulations and having these short-term rentals. Ideally, this should open up more rental units for people that used to be Airbnbs, helping with the rental issue. At least that's the idea here. It's one that hits a little close to home. When I purchased my home, looked for one specifically with a secondary unit that I could rent out or put on Airbnb, and I've chosen to put it on Airbnb. It helps out dramatically with being able to make mortgage payments every month. And you might be saying, Russell, you're taking away a rental unit from somebody by choosing to post something on a short-term rental site, and I would be happy to have a long-term tenant, but with the landlord-tenant boards in many of the provinces in Canada being absolutely backlogged and having to wait 8 months before you get any kind of resolution from any sort of tenant issue, it's just too big a risk to go the traditional rental route. So think of that what you will, but this is where things start to get really, really interesting and controversial. Now, you might have already heard about the massive government subsidies going to EV, electric vehicle battery manufacturers in Canada.
The cost of doing business in the world of electric car batteries is being debated tonight after the price to taxpayers was revealed to keep one project going. A deal between the federal and Ontario governments and automaker Stellantis will see the company get up to $15 billion for a plant in Windsor.
Now, these subsidies were already controversial enough, but just over the past day, a big wrinkle has been added, and we're going to get to that in a second. But first, I've got to set the table for you a little bit here, because Stellantis isn't the only company that's been given these subsidies. This is a recent Parliamentary Budget Officer report, which is a nonpartisan, not liberal, not conservative government organization that sort of does reports and tells people how much are things actually going to cost. And they projected that across the multiple different people that are getting these subsidies, Northvolt, Volkswagen, Stellantis, that expense is going to be around 43.6 billion Canadian taxpayer dollars to subsidize these big companies who are making electric vehicle batteries. Like I said, these subsidies are controversial enough on their own, but this big added wrinkle is making it a lot more interesting. The original argument is that, okay, this makes sense. Let's give these companies the subsidies so that they come here, they hire people from Canada to build the factory, build the plant, and then they employ Canadians to work at the plant. This is the positive take on it, right? That, well, it's going to create Canadian jobs. It's an investment in our Canadian future. But people started squinting at this situation when just a few days ago, the Windsor police, Windsor is where this plant for Stellantis is supposed to be built, posted photos with the South Korean ambassador talking about how many South Korean workers were going to be coming into Windsor's community. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Let's continue here. With LG Energy Solutions battery plant being built, we expect approximately 1,600 South Koreans traveling to work and live in our community in 2024. The federal government's not offering details on the contract that they signed with this big non-Canadian corporation, but it seems like this corporation is bringing in people from outside of the country to build the plant, which is kind of against what this was branded as. it makes people question, like, who are these big deals for? Is it for the Canadians here? Is it to grow our economy, really? Or is it more about, okay, how can we get these big fat checks into the pockets of multinational corporations and giving value to their shareholders and CEOs, extracted from Canadians' pockets, of course, right? And even the NDP member of Parliament from Windsor, who represents that area where the plant is going in, well, he was pretty shocked too.
And of course, because of the United States and their policy they set in Washington, we had to respond with some type of supports and measures. At no point in time did I ever expect, though, being an automotive assembler myself, working in the Windsor plant, that we wouldn't have Windsorites or people from Essex County or people from all over Ontario and other parts of Canada building the facilities and the cars and the parts and all the different things that go together, and of course the batteries that are taking place, especially given the high degree of subsidies that are taking place. I honestly believe that Canadians understand the importance of transitioning into a green economy and want to be part of it, and they actually expect us to be leaders. But when we don't have policy and we don't have transparency, they do get concerned, and justifiably so, upset when we look at public subsidization to corporations that seems to only favor the CEOs and the shareholders and not the workers.
Now, I lost a lot of subscribers when I said that I think climate change is real, but I want to emphasize again and again that I think that the way we're handling it as a country is pretty sketchy. And I don't prescribe to the alarmist narratives that politicians use to rile people up about a lot of this. Now, I don't have faith that the government isn't funneling billions of dollars into green tech projects that are pretty risky investments that might not pay off for Canadians. But on the government side, well, it's a good headline. And they get corporate, well-connected elites fat checks that they can then cash to increase the value of their companies and, as a result, their stock portfolio. It's frustrating. It's becoming maybe a saying on this channel that it seems like the system is the scandal, because this isn't about conservatives or liberals. I think it's largely about the system surrounding all of this stuff. And speaking of which, the other big problem that might overshadow tomorrow's big announcement is a problem that many Canadians are all too familiar with. Take a look at this. It's not going to be a secret to anyone that Canadian interest rates have absolutely surged over the past year and a half, but I want to make a different point here, because take a look at this. This is when, in 2016, the Trudeau government came into power, and they reigned over the country for this entire period of time. One important thing to note here is that the entire time that they were in power, they were experiencing extremely low interest rates, between 0 and 2%, and only crossing 2% over the past year and a half. These low interest rates make it really, really easy to take on a lot of debt to pay for the different social programs that you want to implement. And the government really doubled down on that when pandemic rates actually dropped significantly down to just 0.25%. I think that was a relatively smart idea to take on debt during that period when rates were low. But their big problem was that they didn't lock in those low rates for long enough. Now, let me explain this one simple fact, and once I do, everything else is going to make a lot more sense. You might already know that most of the government services and government programs that happen aren't actually paid for by Canadian tax dollars. Rather, they are paid for by the debt the government goes into. And they sort of fund this money, or they raise this money by selling Government of Canada bonds, which are kind of like IOU notes that people can buy, and the government says, well, I'll pay you this plus this interest rate over this period of time if you give me the money now, right? It's taking out a loan for the government. But there's an element of this that people don't really think about a lot, and it kind of works as a good comparison, saying that the government taking out debt via selling Government of Canada bonds is kind of like the average Canadian who might get a mortgage. It has a term, it has a period, right? Most people will get a 5-year mortgage in Canada, and at the end of those 5 years, they've got to sort of renew their mortgage, get a new mortgage, and they're beholden to whatever interest rate is going to be charged at that point in time when they need to renew. The Government of Canada bonds are a lot like this, because they'll take on debt at a low rate, but then eventually the term of that bond is going to roll over, right? It's going to finish, and they're going to have to take out new debt to cover the debt debt that they haven't paid off. And you can see here that back during the depths of the pandemic, when interest rates were at their lowest, the government of Canada had the opportunity to lock in some very long-term, very low-rate debt, just under 1% here for a 10-year bond, a 10-year period where they could have not had to sort of renew this debt. But most of the debt that was taken on wasn't of that long-term duration. It was relatively short-term, and now that rates are extremely high, at least comparatively to where they were, well, the government is just like Canadians who are facing this renewal on their mortgage. They're facing a renewal of a lot of this debt, but at far higher rates. Now, that means that every penny that's borrowed now, every cent we go more into deficit, it's that much more expensive because of the increased interest costs. And I think Amanda Lang, the well-known Canadian financial journalist, does a great job of sort of adding a little more color to this from this interview that she gave with The Hub just this past week.
Well, let me tell you, voters should care that 11 cents of every dollar we send to Ottawa is being burned. Because that's what, interest payments is just, you don't get anything for that. You've already spent that money. It's just being frittered out the window. That's a lot, but it's only going to grow if we continue to amass debt, which is what you do when you run a deficit. And this is another point Trevor makes that I think is really important. The assumptions this government is living with is that interest rates settle in around 3% for the next 10 years. Are they going to? Well, let me tell you, most Canadian households are starting to wrap their heads around 4% of an overnight rate, 4.5%, because we have to. That might be the new reality.
She talks about how Canada's net debt servicing costs take up about 11 cents of every dollar that they collect. This is just saying that of all the money Canada collects via tax revenue, well, 11% of that, 11 cents of every dollar, is going not to pay down the debt or not to pay for services and things that we expect from our government. No, it's paying the interest cost, the interest portion of that debt that they've taken on. And it seems like that's only going to go up. But she also talks about the new normal of higher rates and how that might happen. And in fact, that's what the Bank of Canada is sort of subtly trying to prepare us for. Just listen to this clip from a speech that the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Caroline Rogers, gave last week.
Before rates started rising last year, they'd been unusually low for a very long stretch of time that started around the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And it could be very tempting to think that rates will return back to those very low rates. But there are reasons to think they may not.
She goes on to explain how we should start expecting rates to be higher for longer and that it's not entirely likely that rates get back down to the record lows that we experienced for a decade between the Great Financial Crisis and 2019. So we need to start expecting rates to be higher for longer, and that means so does the government. That likely means that they're going to try their best to rein in their spending. Now, for many conservatives, they might laugh at that, sort of doubting that they may actually do that. But if they were to rein in the spending, that would be a good thing. But it's also bad news for a lot of vulnerable Canadians who have been waiting and waiting and waiting for programs to help them with the challenges of their life. The existing supports for Canadians with disabilities are small, to say the least, and this is something that the government of Canada has promised for a long time. We're going to take this seriously. We're going to reform the Canadians with disabilities and how they're treated and the kind of supports they get. And one of the sort of keystone parts of this promise was the Canada Disability Benefit, something that the Liberal government has been promising for a very, very long time, something I've been covering on this channel for the past 3 years. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer also gave a report on this, much like he did the Stellantis and the EV battery manufacturing, and they said that, hey, it could range from $2 billion to $20 billion per year to put on this disability benefit, this Canada Disability Benefit. Now, given the raising debt costs, the high interest rates, it's very likely that the Liberals are going to be kicking the can on this. And I think it's something that they probably planned on kicking the can on for a long time. You've probably heard me voice my frustration on this. The disability benefit bill was put forward with no details about who would be qualified, no details about how much people would be paid, no information, just saying this is a framework to say we're going to think about it and we're going to decide over a long period of time what's actually going to happen here. It's what makes me think that they don't actually care about getting this bill forward and that it's sort of just paying lip service to some of their previous promises. And it's something the parliamentary budget officer points out kind of passive-aggressively here in this last paragraph. Due to the lack of basic information in the legislation, most parameters are still unknown, leading to cost estimates that vary widely. It makes me feel like everything is performative. Like even tomorrow's announcement and the many details inside of it is going to be chock full of headlines, but it likely won't mean much. Because saying you'll do something is totally different from actually executing, from actually getting something done. Now, saying that you're going to do something is something that the current government is very, very good at. We've seen time and time again, but it's the execution that I have some major doubts about. And in the end, it seems like, as always, it's the average Canadian, it's you and me, who end up struggling as a result of all of this. When it comes to what's actually going to be inside this announcement, though, you can expect some coverage from me. I won't be around exactly when it's live, around 4 o'clock tomorrow, but if you're seeing this video, probably sometime in the evening, I'll be going live, watching a recap of what actually was announced, going into it in a little bit more detail. So if you want to join me then, feel free to. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can know when that's going on, and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when I go live. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about all of this? What do you think of the Stellaris deal? What do you think about... Hey, we covered a lot in this video. Let me know what you think about any of it. Let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. I want to hear all of it. And thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope it helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.